Good morning. Thanks for joining us. You've arrived at the Innovation Pathways annual January workshop, Designing for Equity. So we just want to welcome everyone. We know these are really challenging times that we are in, and we are hopeful that the time you spend with us this morning feels useful and productive once we get through the couple of hours that we've had planned for you this morning. We want to just start by letting you know that we have a recording happening. We record all of these workshops and our different sessions with you in order to make them available for you to read along on Otter. So if you want to watch a transcription and the captions, you have the option to do that. And if you just click down on the left corner on the Zoom screen, you should be able to see that button, and you can follow it to get to the transcript if you want to watch along. We also will have it available for you not too long after our session. So if you want to come back and check out the notes, or if you have other colleagues who want to chime in and see what happened today, you have the option to do that. We also want to ask you at this time to change your screen name or your Zoom name. And so follow those three little dots in the corner of your screen. And we want to ask you to add your name and your district at this time. Some of you have logged on with maybe district or school computers, and we just want to make sure, not for only our purposes, but for the rest of your colleagues that are here today, they can put names to faces and to the communities that you're joining us from. So we want to just pause for a quick moment to mention the team. I'm Dawn Shira-Corin. I'm a senior associate as well as a redesign coach with the Center for Collaborative Education. I've been here for 4 years and joining you off and on over the few years that we've been working with you. We have Callie Cornell, who is our lead on our project, joining us today as well. Of course, you all know Jennifer. Allison is our dynamite project manager. She makes sure everything is threaded together to make these sessions work for us on the tech side and making sure all those good things are taken care of. We also want to mention Laura Toder. For those of you that maybe were on at our last session, Laura had given me permission to let you know that she would be leaving for maternity leave. And so she will be out for the next few months. She has a healthy baby boy who joined us just before the end of the school year. So we just want to mention her as one of the team members, and she'll be back hopefully before we wrap up this year. I don't know if Oscar's on with us. Oscar is our executive director for the Center for Collaborative Education. And I did see Corbett Couts, who is with us, and he's a new member of our team. I'll just mention him. He's our project lead for our Massachusetts Consortium for Innovation Education Assessment, MCIA, who's with us today as well. And I don't know, Jennifer or Callie, if I've missed anybody from the department who might be here.
I think that most of my team is actually in a competing meeting at the moment, unfortunately, but I will check the list, and if anybody is here, I'll be sure to call them out. Thanks, Dawn.
Awesome. Thank you. So just a reminder of our mission. Our mission is to partner with schools and districts and communities. We want to increase voice and ownership of the work that you do, increase equity and opportunities for all students students and families, I should say, and school districts, to reduce systemic racism and transform schools to ensure that all students are succeeding. And you guys all know this. This is why you're doing innovation pathways in your schools and in your districts. So hopefully we're fully aligned or closely aligned with the work that we're setting out to do. Just want to do a quick mention of our goals today. Again, this is an annual January Design for Equity workshop, and we have a couple of things lined up for you today. We want to determine individual school strengths and areas in terms of your growth in creating equitable access for students. So we have a couple of things lined up to just help us have some think time, really, and maybe some sharing amongst each other around that first bullet there. We're going to explore a continuous improvement process with focus on equitable access, participation, and culturally responsive practice. and then building connections within the innovation pathways. And towards the latter part of our session this morning, we have a couple of your colleagues who will share some of the best practices, or promising practices, I should say, in their districts that they're trying, and they were excited to share with you today. And again, our agenda, welcome. We're going to have some connections, give you all a chance to go into breakout rooms. We've outlined some designing for equity, thinking again, and some reflection there. And you can see just our timing there. Please, you know, be considerate of us working to squeeze in as much as we can while not doing too much. Sometimes less is more, but I see that Callie has the times there for us. And so we're going to do our best to stay within those time frames. So if you feel us moving along, it's because we really want to make sure that we get to all of the pieces, but we certainly don't want to rush through. And I think it's maybe a good point here to say that there's places where we made some decisions not to have large group conversations. I see we have about 35 of us all together here today. So there'll be times when we encourage you to add to the chat, or maybe only welcome a couple of voices in, just because we want to push along and stay close to time and make sure that we can get through to everything we've planned today.
Dawn, if I could just add in for a moment, I wanted to recognize that if you've been with us for a while, and if you were at our very first workshop in March of 2020, which seems like an eternity ago, this workshop was actually an almost full day workshop. And so I just want to recognize that online professional learning, particularly extended learning like this, when it's a couple hours, can be difficult. And so, and particularly given that our topic around equity, thinking about inequitable access and sort of being disruptors within our systems can be tricky in an online space. And so we've tried to be really thoughtful about the timing and our activities today. And so if you feel us pushing along, as Dawn said, we want to make sure we get to all of the things that were planned and the good conversation, and really designed a lot of this to be reflective for you to engage in sort of individual reflection, and then in reflection with some of your peers in some breakout and other sort of activity spaces. Thanks, Dawn.
Yeah, welcome. And thanks to Callie for her leadership on this. We act as thought partners with her, but she does take the lead on making sure we can make all of what she described happen. And thank you to Callie as well for this cartoon here. We want to return this virus altogether. Nobody asked for it. Nobody wants it. And so this is the latest cartoon that she's been able to find and share with us. We want to just ask again to be patient with each other. I know I have a 2-year-old granddaughter that's around somewhere here with my college-age student babysitting, because mom returned to school today, but daycare wasn't open. So if anyone's in that same situation at home, working from home, or in your schools, just recognizing that these are different times, and do what you need to attend to what's around you, and take in the humor or not in regards to what we are all dealing with, quarantining. And I think really what I want to say here, which might fit with the cartoon or not, is how much appreciation I have for all of you that are in schools, and what you're doing to keep students and children engaged in buildings. You deserve tons of kudos for that work, and I greatly appreciate what you're doing. Like all of my own children's teachers, it's awesome that you're able to do that. So thank you.
Well said, Dawn. I'm going to have us jump right in, and we're going to move into some small group conversations. If you are sort of used to our style of these meetings, we usually start with a connections opportunity, either in the chat or sort of as whole group, and we're going to try something a little bit different today. And so we want to jump into some small group conversations to really prime our brains for the content today. And so in a moment, you'll be invited into small groups of 3 or 4 participants, so 3 or 4 colleagues. And we'll ask you to reflect on these 2 questions. When you think about equity and innovation pathways, what does it mean to you? And from your particular role within innovation pathways. And then if it's applicable to you, where do you see equity and innovation pathways sort of situated within the broader equity efforts within your school or within your district? That's a lot to think about, particularly first thing in the morning. I know here it's very early. I'm coming to you from Northern Colorado. It's still dark out, but for you all, your days are just getting started, and so a lot. And so before we jump into just talking with one another, we're going to give you a couple minutes of just individual think time. So just sort of like think on these 2 questions. I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes. My colleague Allison has put these 2 questions in the chat if it's helpful for you to see them there as well. So I'm going to put a timer on. Do some individual reflection time on these 2 questions. Feel free to jot down notes if it's helpful to you. And then after that, we'll open up some breakout rooms so that you can have some conversation and reflect with some colleagues on this question. And welcome back. I think we have everybody back now. I hope that you had some good conversations, were able to make some good connections. And I wonder, before we move on, if we could hear from a couple of people about some highlights from their conversation. It could be something that you shared. It could be something that someone within your group shared, but we'd love to sort of hear some of your voices. It's been mostly us talking this morning, so I'd love to hear some of your voices if you have some reflections or highlights from the conversation you just had. Feel free to unmute and share.
Sure, I'll jump in. We had a great group, and certainly on our end, where we're really just trying to get going, just the realization is, how do we communicate with families? Are we being effective with really being able to reach our outreach? How does that look? Are we effective? Is this just our assumption? We need to look at how we do this and not maybe do business as normal. And I think a point that was brought out in the group too is having students, we're looking at advanced manufacturing, so break it down to facets. How would students see themselves involved in this pathway to cut across everything? And I think, you know, that was really, really great feedback from that in terms of communication and visualizing, be involved specifically with that pathway, what that might look like to incoming freshman students.
Excellent, thank you. And such an important point to think about, or remind ourselves to not make assumptions about the student or the family experience, and really to do the sort of work of uncovering and understanding their perspective as we design and continue to improve our programs. Really powerful, thank you. Anyone else?
Sure, I'll chime in. My name is Jamie Lynn Gordon. I'm over in the greater New Bedford area. And, you know, just kind of piggybacking on what he mentioned, having students be able to see themselves in these different avenues without necessarily already being placed in an internship. An example of how our group had did this quite a few months back, we hosted a high school event strictly for freshmen, where we invited men and women in non-traditional industries. And so the students got a chance to hear from a panel of about 5 to 6 professionals. One was a woman who headed the robotics department of Amazon. Another was a male who was heading the nursing department at one of the local hospitals. And so these freshmen had yet to choose what their trade would be, what their shop would be for the school year. But at least the conversation, it was a safe space for them to ask questions, because as we know, a lot of our students will select where their friends are going, or the industry, or the career path that mom and dad or grandpa took. So we really wanted to just provide safe spaces to have them ask questions to people who are actually doing the work. So just wanted to share that.
Excellent. And being really intentional about the kinds of models or the folks you're offering students conversations with. It reminds me of something that came up in a previous workshop where folks were talking about students can't be it if they don't see it. I think I'm probably butchering the phrase, right? But sort of really making sure that those models or students who look like them, who are the same gender, race, identity, sort of are in these roles, so students can see a potential themselves there, and to really talk about what that experience is like, I think can be really powerful, particularly while they're in their high school years. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm running out of time, but maybe one more. These are great to hear your reflections.
I wanted to
Oops. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I just wanted to share that as on the family engagement point. I have to say that Lori Dorr, the superintendent of Falmouth District, made a significant promise and has kept it to our diverse community to meet people where they're at. So she has gone to where different races, ethnicities meet at their different meeting points with a translator. And that's how we're initiating more family involvement so everyone's voice is heard.
Terry, thank you. Another good example of sort of not making assumptions. You know, oftentimes schools can be an intimidating place for folks. And so really coming to where your community members are and hearing voices. So appreciate that. Thanks, everyone. I wish we had time to hear from everyone, but so grateful for those of you who shared. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Don for a little bit. We have for the next, I don't know, 10 to 15 minutes or so, we're sort of share a framework and some reflections around that framework, and then give you an opportunity to do some sort of individual thinking and brainstorming and sharing with one another with a new tool. So with that, I'll turn it over to Don.
Thank you, Callie. And I want to also acknowledge what I heard. Daniel sharing, you know, a problem of practice, this idea of family engagement, and the belonging piece that I didn't catch the name of the second person who spoke, but, you know, helping students see themselves. Like Daniel said, you happen to be right here on my screen. And that other person talked about bringing in individuals, I believe from the New Bedford area. And then Terry, your point of like meet people where they are. I think about the idea of listening conferences. We could do a whole session around listening conferences and what it means to go to where people are. And then it's valuable to go and give families info on what we're doing and how to engage their kids, but it's also really valuable to go and say, I want to hear about your hopes and dreams for your kids, what's working, what are the strengths and the assets of your community. And I think I can weave some of that into the time that we're going to have together next, but wanted to acknowledge those powerful comments that have just been shared as well. So we have called this an equity framework. And I want to say I'm not sharing any one specific framework. There are so many different frameworks that are in my Google Drive in a folder that I go to and pull from. And we also created one at CCE at one point. And I really am just thinking about what does it mean to have an equity mindset, an equity framework that you operate from, while I'll share a couple of different things along the way as well. So I see Callie push the slide forward, but there's nothing on my slide. There we go. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's coming in jagged like that, but just to this idea of the equity framework. This slide really comes from what I did with you all 2 years ago at that first workshop where we were in person for 6 hours that day. And we talked about the fact that it's not just about equitable access. And so the innovation pathways text and paperwork and all of the framing talks about equitable access. And what we really wanted to just say is that it's not just in creating access. Equity or the need for creating equity is going to show up everywhere along the way in your pathway, in your partnerships, and how you create connections to career, particularly in how you enhance student supports. Equity has to be at the forefront of your mind from the beginning to the end. Our faculty or staff that are working with students, if they don't represent a diverse group of adults and reflect the students that are in the room, that's okay. It's a good idea that we push for that, but it's also important that everyone, whether you represent your population of marginalized students or not, that you are working towards having this sort of equity mindset or centered in equity, as we might talk about along the way here. So again, I just think I'll say quickly, you know, the difference between equality and equity is that equity is about making sure that all students have what they need, not that everything is equal across populations. So we sent out a email a short time ago with hopes that you might have an opportunity to take a look at this supplemental tool from our Building for Equity toolkit. And it's a self-assessment that we want to ask you to take a couple of minutes now. If you already looked at it and checked off your answers, then reflect back on why you might have chosen the answers that you did. And if you didn't have a chance to look at it, Allison just popped it into the chat where you can open it up and you can download a copy for yourself. Again, want you to think about where do you fall in these different areas, and giving you a couple of minutes to think about that.
And I just want to say that we have shared, so if you've been with us for a lot of sessions or even just a couple, we've shared a lot of different resources that look similar to a self-assessment, or sort of like a rating oneself. And we have shared different resources and often for different purposes. And so really wanted just, these quick indicators are certainly not exhaustive, but this list really is around sort of equity design and implementation specific to innovation pathways. And sort of this document was initially created as a supplement to a longer tool, which certainly we can share at another point, but I thought these were sort of like really salient pieces as we were planning to think about it for today's workshop. But a note of, like, you've seen the program reflection guide, which has guiding questions around equity. There's a site self-assessment tool, which is sort of a lengthier tool to think about where you are in your program, where the strengths and where the weaknesses are. We've also, if you're in the application planning process, have shared the criteria planning tools for part A and part B, and all sort of have elements around this. So I just wanted to sort of recognize and acknowledge that we have shared lots of different tools, and it doesn't mean sort of like one's better than the other, but sort of just thinking about using them at different purposes at different times. So I wanted to share that. And so with that, I'll stop talking and allow you the few minutes to take a look at the document if you've not already, and if you have, to sort of reflect and remind yourself about your ratings that were there.
Yeah, and I think Callie, it would be okay to go ahead to the next screen while we give some think time, maybe a minute or two of think time now, and ask folks to also think about these questions. And I've also just put them in the chat. So we're going to keep moving ahead, and it feels like a good place to invite you into the conversation, but I'm going to keep talking for a few more minutes because we have something more exciting coming up shortly. I just saw a comment in the chat about needing better resources, especially regards to translation, and having people that are successful in different areas, different races, to show students what they can do. So that's interesting. I definitely agree about translation. That feels like that's a technical piece, adaptive and technical, but it's a resource capacity piece that all districts should be investing in. You just can't engage families and help them to support their students if you can't meet them where they are. We won't talk as much about the translation today, but getting to this point of, supporting students from all different backgrounds, different races specifically, as well as other marginalized situations they might have, like language, like income and access to opportunities in regards to income. So just thinking about this self-assessment that we've done and that you've just looked at, and Callie, if you can go ahead to that next screen. I want to point out for us here that this particular document touches on a lot of different areas, right? The first and the last indicators and looking at it really relate to recruitment. They talk about having diverse student representation and multiple entry points to your pathway. Yep, that one. Thank you, Callie. The second indicator talks about retention of students, right? And so this idea of once you have students in the program, how do you ensure that you don't end up having disproportionate number of students that are finishing your program, right? So we hear that a lot about kids can get to college, are they finishing college? You can get kids to your pathway program. How are we keeping them there? And how are we focusing on that being about what we do as adults and the systems we create within our programs and in our schools and our districts, and not about the students. It wasn't the right fit for the student, didn't work for the student, but paying attention to what is within our sphere of influence and those structures and systems. And then, like you said, right, creating a place of belonging, creating a place where they can see themselves in this role, increasing the motivation and the interest for them to be there, giving them the supports to be successful. So the second indicator hones in on thinking about those range of things when we think about this work. The third and fourth indicators address how we support marginalized student groups, specifically navigating the business communities and how they navigate success in these high-level classes. I have heard from many of you in earlier sessions over the past few years about this need to really think about how we support students in higher level classes and how do we help them be prepared for that coming into high school. How do we support them once we get there? And it is something that Callie and Jennifer, Laura, the rest of the team are continuing to think about, and we'll continue to weave that in as we have these sessions with you. The fifth indicator connects to what we are doing, what we are going to do next in our own time with you today, right? And it thinks about creating welcoming environments. So there's that connection you guys made early on about a sense of belonging. I think a lot about identity safety in classrooms. There's a lot of research on it. And how do we create safe spaces where students are belonging? That's a really important equity component that we need to be immersing ourselves in as we continue to work towards increasing equity, understanding what it means to create equity in our spaces. We're hearing a lot of B's at the end of the DEIB acronym in districts that I'm involved with, at least. And so that, again, is that belonging. Some people have social justice at the end of their DEI, but safety in the classroom is really important. Feeling connected, feeling like you can learn, those positive relationships that happen there are really critical. And I think that I like to think about it, and I'm sure many of you as educators know this, right? If you are safe in a space, you free up cognitive space to be able to engage. If you are anxious and you're not sure, worried about taking a risk, like your brain can only handle so much. And so the more we can create spaces where students' identity feels safe, the more that we can create space and opportunity for them to engage in the other work that we're trying to do. So on the next slide, before we get to the nitty gritty of our activity coming up, this just happened to be a conceptual graphic, conceptual model. It's from ProInspire, and I've done some, I've used some of their tools in the past. They're not specific to supporting schools, and they do work with organizations, but they do a lot of equity work. And what I loved about this graphic, and just wanted, again, there's so many frameworks, just wanted to put in front of you is this idea of at the center is our own understanding of all of this work. And so as a professional and an educator who does work with adults around increasing equity, thinking about anti-racist practices, I can't say enough that we have to do the work ourselves to really understand the context of what identity means, what your own identity means when you walk in the world, and what the identity of your students and your family means when you walk in the world. And we didn't learn this in college. My college age students are doing some of this in their classes right now, but I should say my college age children, but you know, what is our identity as a mixed racial woman who identifies as Black and is as fair skinned as I am? When I walk in the room, it impacts how people engage with me. And so that's what this graphic offers. And it goes from the inner circle to the outer circle. We are understanding how systems are in place that also impact our students. If our students are being excused from school, asked to leave school for different reasons, that's a system. It's around discipline. It might be around whatever it's trying to address, but just looking for the equity within that. And so we're not going to go any deeper than that right now in respects to thinking about identity and systems per se. But I hope that you can hold that and take that with you as you think about the rest of the session today and what we are trying to share with you. What we're going to do next is to look at a Padlet that we've created. And so I have a Padlet, we have a Padlet And it is all about thinking about what impacts student success. Allison has just dropped that Padlet into the chat where you should be able to open it and have access to it with no problem. Certainly drop in the chat right away if there's any reason why you can't open it. This Padlet is pre-populated with concepts, ideas, not so much theories, but these nuances and these realities of experiences that students experience. And we've tried to list them in a way that was neutral. It's not necessarily a negative experience or a positive experience. It's just the reality of an experience that happens. And what we want you to do is to think about with all of these concepts that you'll see there, and there's a good handful of them, is how they, what the context is for yourself, and then again for your students and your families. And we have some directions that we want to share as you move into looking at the Padlet. So the point here was to, hone in on all the different things that could potentially be either supporting or creating a barrier for student success within our schools. And so what we want you to do is to check out what we have there. What's missing? Maybe we didn't capture everything, even though I think I didn't count them. There's got to be 15 different ideas there, right? But maybe there's more, and we want to leave room for you to add anything. And if you see something that's missing, take 2 minutes to do that. Then we want to ask you to take 10 minutes to comment. Go in there and look at what those concepts are and comment about how you see them impacting you, your students and their families, or the culture in your buildings. And so we want to invite folks to do as many comments as you can in the 10 minutes that we'll allot you. And then we'll ask you to take the last 3 minutes to like other people's comments. Give an indicator either through the like command or through a comment to someone else's comment why it resonates with you and what your thoughts are about that. So I'm hoping that that's clear to everyone, and we want to release you into the Padlet to spend some time there. I guess I want to say, is there any questions? Are there any questions that I've left you with?
And I wondered, Padlet might be new to some folks, and so I'm happy to just do a quick screen share tutorial on how to comment and like.
Love that. That would be really helpful.
Perfect.
And then we'll give folks time, like indicators, Callie, right? I know folks are already getting started and looking, but we wanted to, along the way, kind of be a timekeeper and encourage you to take those first few minutes and the beginning and the end, as you'll see in the directions there. So thanks, Callie.
Of course. And if you'll forgive me, I just have so many windows open at the moment, so I'm at the right one now. So this, when you open that link, this is exactly what you should see. There's directions here, so you don't need to sort of like toggle back and forth between, well, we won't have the slides up for a moment, but you do, so the directions are all embedded. And then if you've not used Padlet before, there's a few different things. To add a topic or a concept here, you can click the pink circle in the lower right-hand corner. You can open that right up. You can type in your subject, select test. You can tag people if you want. And then you can type in sort of like your test language, test, all here. And then you hit publish. And that will add sort of a new box. And it sort of keeps it in this grid form. So you might see it sort of like jumping around a little bit as folks are adding. But then you can also add comments. So you can type, just click right in where it says comment, add comments, and you can type in a comment. It will give you, I'm sort of logged in, but it will give you a sort of anonymous username. And then you can also like things. You can click this little heart just as you would on any social media to thumbs up or thumbs down, so you can like things. And so I'm going to delete this so that doesn't interfere with what's here. But really sort of, we hope, simple, straightforward, easy to use, and also gives us a record of the conversations, the thoughts, and the brainstorming of you all today.
We weren't necessarily sure what to expect here, and I'm looking to my screen to the left here, just trying to keep up with all of the comments that are happening. It's great to see them finally coming in. For a moment there, I wasn't too sure how this activity was going to go, but I can see that it has stimulated your thinking, and all of you are either reading and or chiming in with various ideas. I was just looking at one of them that talked about making it inviting for parents and families, and not only a difference in language, but the reality that we want to create spaces where families feel comfortable. I think it's also speaking to have a sense of safety to come into a conversation with all of us professionals that are educated. They see us as experts, but invite them into that space to find out the best ways to support their children, find out what the information is that they need, give them the social capital about our spaces and our environments if they don't have it already, about the ins and outs and how to navigate the space to support their children is everything that I took away from that one comment that I saw there. And so each piece here could be a breakout room and another 30 minutes of conversation, helping us think through the various components. And I just want to acknowledge that this equity work is not a one-time thing where we can talk about it, check a box, say we did it, and move on. It is an ongoing piece that is always informing our moves along the way and what we do in schools with students and families. So with that said, we want to, yes, the Padlet absolutely will be shared. We will keep it open so that you have access to it. And we would love to share it broadly with this whole audience of the Innovation Pathways group. We want to invite your voice in. It would be great to hear again from a few of you what resonates with you about this activity, and what are some of the things that it's making you think about that you want to continue to do or need to think more about following our time together in this activity. So again, not so much each piece of what's here, but what are your thoughts about this activity and how is it informing your thinking moving ahead? I just want to open the floor to anyone who wants to share.
Hi, Dawn. I can comment a little bit. It's Nisha here from Northampton High School.
Hi, Nisha. Nice to hear from you. Please.
I think for us, we have an IT pathway. So for a couple of years now, we've been able to practice a lot of some of these equity concerns. And I think what resonates with me is how we need to implement like actual program structures to help make some of this stuff happen. Like, yeah, we can say all day we want to support students with IEPs, but if we don't have like, clear maps or clear tools or all the resources in one place, then we're not actually doing that work. So I think for us, it's really being mindful about where are our gaps, and like where are gaps not only for ourselves and what we are aware of, but where are gaps with the resources and what the students are looking for. And I think we are also being mindful that we need better assessments with our students. Like we need to ask them, what are you missing and how can you be more successful? And we don't do that enough. So I think that a lot of these equity issues can be resolved by asking good questions.
Thank you. I appreciate and love everything that you shared. Don't want to take up the space reflecting on what Misha shared and how I'm thinking about it. I want to leave the space open for others to share. Other thoughts, ideas that resonate with you that you're thinking about as part of our conversation.
I think one of the things on the Padlet about SEL, and I like what Molly said as far as the resources, because I think that the other piece that needs to be addressed as you talk about belonging is that people feel accepted regardless of what the stigmas that come along with their race, sex, gender, identity, whatever it is that, well, somebody like me can't do that. I could only do this. And so I think to help with that mental health stigma piece, it not only would help the student, it actually can change that student to help their family as they get older. That's just my piece.
Thank you, Terry. That's a really good point as well. Absolutely. There another person that would be willing to share? Daniel took his mask off. Are you going to unmute?
No, I just had somebody come into my office. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. No problem. Sorry to put
apologize.
you on the spot.
I know I love the Padlet piece because I'm going through there thinking about all the areas that we can improve, and certainly the area of being able to provide motivation, I think, is an interesting one as well, because that goes into connections, but also understanding, what helps students, be able to utilize, how can the pathway be leveraged to help all students, because students are motivated in so many different ways and many different ways of connections, and knowing where students aren't connected, that also can provide opportunities as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, so there's a lot here to take away, and just, building on the couple of comments that you guys shared, regardless of the stigmas you said, Terry, and I think that we have to remember that the way that we walk in the world, our education level, our knowledge base, so many different things about ourselves might not always allow us to know what students and families are experiencing. So that goes back to that point of just creating time to ask, find out where people are, but also understanding that we have to reconstruct and rewrite some of the narratives that have been happening for a really long time. That's what Innovation Pathways is all about, to do something outside of the box. And so in addition to the pathway, thinking about how are we restructuring systems that exist that can invite people in that might not have had experiences where they've been invited in. And some of it is technical system stuff, and some of it is adaptive stuff, really meeting people where they are, continuing to think about how do you create a space of belonging. If you were having a cookout in your backyard, thinking about really warm weather, not too warm, but nice enough to be outside and socializing, like how do you create this welcoming space for the people for whom you might invite to your home, and really thinking about that, like we think about our schools and our classrooms and the buildings and all of the things that we'd give attention to there. And Misha, your point around structures, I think, is a big piece that we could talk some more about. How do you create structures so that students can succeed? I know of one model, I may have mentioned it here before, but a suburban high school outside of Boston, not a district that's here with us today and part of this program, but they were working to increase numbers of students in their higher level classes, in their honors and their AP classes. And so they created affinity homerooms for students of color. They could opt in, but they could also opt out and stay with their traditional homerooms. And they created these homeroom spaces with 2 adults. And they created space where students were studying, building relationships there because they were in honors classes. If you didn't opt to try to move into an honors class that particular year, then you might not opt into these homerooms. But a structural piece that I'm just offering as an example, and I'm happy to talk about it more if anyone's interested or connect you. But I think the point of knowing that it might not just happen with the schedule that you have, with the routines and the structures that are in buildings, and that some systems analysis, over time and preparing for the months and the years ahead is a piece of this work to be thinking about in respects to your innovation pathways and your buildings and high schools that you're in. I know we want to push ahead. I'm not sure how off we are with time, but I'm going to wrap up really quickly, Callie, and just mention to you all that we created a second Padlet, and it has articles and some videos. It's been pre-populated again with a range of different resources that I might use in some of my equity work and supporting school districts or doing professional development and some of my other work. And so really just gathered those resources and put them here for you. And there's more than what you can tackle. So I'm not suggesting that you try to tackle all of them, but we want to encourage you to think about reading one or two of these articles, checking out a video. And then Callie, I think we have on the next slide where we offered some sort of takeaways. We want to make this an actionable opportunity for you. Anything that we're doing in our professional development is also about what can you take away. And so the learning and the growing and partnering, thought partnering with each other is one thing that's really huge in terms of thinking about how do you grow and develop. And so we want to invite you to partner with a colleague. Maybe 2-3 of you all could tag team, reach out to each other. Maybe we can support them, Callie, offline. Like, what article do you guys want to read? And then talk about it with each other. Think about how you can grow. Commit to one thing that's within your sphere of influence. If there's something today that you've heard or in the articles you see, you know, what can you do? Take something away and make it actionable. Maybe go and like meet your community where they are. It was a great action that was shared, but it also was my superintendent has made a promise that she's followed through with, right? So that may or may not be in your own sphere of influence, but whatever you can do that is an actionable step and it's concrete, and you can look at it and say, did that work? Did that increase something that I'm trying to increase, improve, or remove a barrier? And then just connecting in your building or your district with others and starting to strategize. So we hope that this has been helpful. I think with the Padlet, I wanted to say that I tried to put in resources that also have strategies. They're not just about reading about theories, although some of them might be, in helping to develop our own equity mindset, but there are also pieces in there that give you some to-do, some action, some things that you can try. The microaggressions video is a really good one that I'd encourage everyone to check out. It's student produced and all young people talking to us. So with that said, I'm going to hand it back to you, Callie.
I'd add one more comment about the second Padlet with resources is that in the same way that you were able to add to the first Padlet, you have that ability to add to the second. So if you have go-to resources that you have either that you have built internally or that you use from external organizations, feel free to add those. Make sure to give credit where credit's due for the folks who produce those resources, but feel free to add them. And so these 2 links, both Padlets, will continue to be available to you. They will stay up and be a resource that you can connect to. And so we'd encourage you, as you're reviewing, if there are things that you want to share with the network, please feel free to do so.
And we do have the quote, Callie, that you encouraged us to keep. I wonder, is anybody willing to unmute and read it for us rather than it be my voice? It'd be great to hear someone read it.
You want somebody to read it?
Yeah, that'd be great, Daniel.
I'm
Thank
on
you.
fire. I might as well keep going today, right? I had my breakfast today. Teachers bring their entire autobiographies with them. Their experiences, identities, values, beliefs, attitudes, hang-ups, biases, wishes, dreams, and hopes. It is useless for them to deny this. The most they can do is acknowledge how these may either get in the way of or enhance their work with students. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah. And I think the work with students, I'm sure Sonia Nieto was also thinking students and their families, or even with our colleagues as we continue to need to partner and be a team wrapping around the work that you're setting out to do. So thanks again, everyone. And thanks, Daniel, for reading that.
Excellent. Thank you. One of the purposes of today's workshop is really to spark thinking, spark ideas on strategies and ways that you might be able to be, we sort of mentioned this word at the beginning, but just disruptor within your school, and not necessarily with a bad connotation, but really start to ask the questions, dig deeper, get to know students and families in a way that helps you hold out a vision and guide more equitable pathway programming within your school and district. And so we're fortunate enough to have 2 Innovation Pathways colleagues to share examples of work that has or is currently happening within their schools. So we have Kristen Almquist and Mike Rubin to share these sort of rapid spotlights, what we're calling them, to highlight different entry points into thinking about equity work within innovation pathways within their schools. And so it's important to note, before we turn the mic over to the two of them, that these are they're just one example or just a couple of examples in a couple of different schools around a particular challenge that surfaced for them. And so certainly they're bound to be powerful examples that Kristen and Mike will share, but they illustrate sort of a couple of thousands of examples of how schools might engage with and address inequities. And so we offer them as examples of how you might go about the work to spark thinking and strategies. And there might be pieces of what they share that work well in your context, or you might say that might not work at all in our context and we need to think about something differently. And really the purpose of having them and asking them to share is to start to get you to reflect and think on how some of these strategies, how some of the learnings we've sort of just explored within the Padlets sort of support your own thinking about equity within your pathway programming. And so we've asked Kristen and Mike to share and sort of frame their presentations as mini case studies, and sort of giving some details sort of very quickly in just a few minutes. So we won't get all of the details that I'm sure you all want to hear from them, but in just a few minutes, sort of asking them sort of to address 4 things. What brought them to the realization about a source of inequity, sort of what inspired them to take this challenge on? Was there an essential question that really drove the development of their solutions? Who did they enlist for support? And finally, to share both what was and what wasn't successful about their efforts. And so with that, I'm really pleased to share our Rapid Spotlight presenters. We have Kristen Almquist, the Director of Early College and Career Pathways at the Dearborn STEM Academy in Boston. And we have Mike Rubin, the Principal of Uxbridge High School. And so with that, I believe we have Kristen first. Yes, I'm going to turn it right over to you, Kristen.
Thanks, Callie. Super happy to be here. So I'm Kristen Almquist. I'm the Director of Early College and Career Pathways at the Dearborn, which is actually, we can hit the next slide. The Dearborn is an open enrollment school in Boston. So for those of you that aren't familiar, there are different sort of tiers of schools. There's exam schools and application schools. And Dearborn is an open enrollment school, meaning any student can select to go there. We are a wall-to-wall innovation pathway school. We have 3 pathways in engineering, health science, and computer science. We selected these for many of the reasons that all of you do as well, purely on labor market demand and the need to build diverse pipelines in those particular industries. And what we see in our pathway work at Dearborn is high levels of engagement, increased attendance, willingness to engage in aligned advanced coursework. So a lot more of our students are taking college level and AP coursework in their areas of pathways, and students making really clear connections to their future and how they can leverage what they're doing in high school to advance them in opportunities in their post-secondary planning. Next slide, please. So I have 2 ways that we work to try to increase equity at the Dearborn. We are about 98% underrepresented student populations. Our students are Black and Brown. So racially, we're not trying to diversify our pathways in the school. However, where the hugest inequity lies for us is our students to be able to access STEM pathways in their post-secondary plans, either in college or career. So what we realized is as we develop a pathway in computer science, many of the people that we're engaging with in the computer science industry are all white, all male, and really had to think about strategically how we partner with people. The same was true for engineering. So we had to be very, very strategic, and we thought we'd attack it through the partnerships. And really, as we develop our close industry partnerships, we wanted companies that were ready to do all of the following. So when we meet a new partner, we have these conversations of, are you actually trying to diversify their talent pipeline? Are you truly dedicated to hiring more, students and persons of color, especially in the gaming world or in computer science, hiring more females, similar with engineering. They wanted to forge a really close working relationship with our school community, provide multiple year opportunities. So we asked our partners to work with us from 9th grade through post high school, engage in conversations around race, lack of diversity in their industry, and then take specific steps they need to address white supremacy in their professional context. This is a lot of anti-racism work, a lot of really open and vulnerable conversations that we have with our partners about our students' needs, their ability to access, how they're feeling, and then help students gain confidence and comfortability entering less diverse settings. And we spend a lot of time talking to our students about that, about their hopes, their fears, you know, the various things that students may go through in an internship and things like that. And then we work with professionals and organizations who value diversity and empowerment. So one of our really close working relationships is with ABE, the American Association of Black Energy. Their president actually, their Greater Boston president actually is our engineering teacher. She came in this year and was really committed to doing this work with us. So those are some of the ways that we're working on it. We know we're not going to change these industries right now. And if you look at statistics, we see that the same problem is in higher ed with what students are accessing and completing degrees in STEM fields. But the hope is that like our students could lead this change and be a catalyst for change. So these are the ways that we're working on that through strategic partnership. Next slide, please. The second big inequity that we saw at the Dearborn, which was a bit of a surprise to us, was a gender inequity in our computer science pathway. And I know most people would say, well, duh, we tend to see more young gentlemen gravitate towards computer science than we see our young women. However, at the Dearborn, what was interesting to us is we're very strategic. So our students take computer science, all students take computer science grades 6 through 9. The computer science teachers in grades 6 through 9 are female, and one is a female of color. So we would assume that maybe more females seeing a likeness in their teachers would want to engage. And what happened was the opposite. So this is a work in progress for us. It's a problem that we really saw for the first time very heavily this year. So it took, we took a pause and sort of said, all right, we know that this is happening. What is it that we can do? In addition to, you know, making sure females have access to females doing this work, whether it's in the classroom or through industry. But we want to revise our 11th grade or our curriculum a little bit. Our 11th grade course opens with video design. Obviously, we know this is a typical misogynistic culture that's part, and we have students look at this as part of the unit of study. But we're realizing now with feedback, especially from some of our female students, this isn't really super interesting for them. So we want to work on how we're talking about it. We also want to work on maybe not opening with such an area of interest that doesn't seem to interest our female students. So we're going to revise our marketing. For the reasons above, we've shifted the game design portion of our curriculum is not the selling point, and highlighting more social media, cybersecurity, and social justice components of our curriculum, which are all there and very prevalent, but don't seem to be what has typically been highlighted when talking about our program. And then create more opportunities for our computer science pathway alumni and our upperclasswomen to mentor and work with our younger DSA students. So that, again, they can sort of see themselves and see some of the successes that some of our young females have had to this point. And I believe that is it for me, and I can hand off to Mike.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Some powerful examples around really taking a moment to be strategic and thoughtful and understand what was happening. I think, you know, I appreciate that you shared that these, particularly the second inequity that you addressed around gender, sort of surprised you, given all of the things that you had put in place to sort of prevent that, and then having some time to have conversations. And we started, I think it was Daniel who started today with a comment around don't make assumptions, right? And so really digging in to understand the experience for your female students is powerful. Thank you for sharing. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to share a bit more around the whole school effort that they engaged in around exploring and addressing inequities. Mike.
Thanks. And thanks, Kristen. It was ours is going to have a little bit of a different approach, just because of, I think, the different demographic that we have here at UHS. So when over the last couple of years, and this is really process oriented and looking at a whole school approach for equitable outcomes and thinking about some of the things that you just saw in that Padlet, supports for students, different kinds of opportunities to demonstrate learning, authentic content, and skills-based learning. So if we want to skip ahead. Next slide. We wanted to make sure that our entire school had an understanding of what an innovation pathway was and or is, and had a hand in defining what sort of skills we wanted to see in all students. And when we said all, we meant all. We wanted to look at specifically some of our students who were not getting access to post-secondary education, or were considering going directly into the workforce, but had struggled with access to our local vocational school, our local technical high school, specifically over the 3 years that we're talking about here, had not accepted a lot of students with disabilities. And we also wanted to look at how those soft skills or those transferable skills could be embedded within each discipline, so that we could shift away from those are the technical classes, these are the academic classes, and these are all our students. So next slide. One of the things that we did very early on, we brought in some of our workforce partners, and we did this as part of a first day of school activity to kind of set the tone for the year. We watched the film Most Likely to Succeed, and then followed it up with a couple of different protocols for discussion. And within each one of the discussion groups, we had individuals from different disciplines and workforce partners, all sharing sort of their own perspectives. And we used that to help drive what sort of skills we were seeing, not just on a local, but also a statewide and a national scale, and finding ways to integrate those within our disciplines, and also ways that we could provide students feedback on them. We also invited some of those same, and actually a few other workforce partners, to participate in school council meetings and even department meetings, where we help drive the vision of our graduate, looking at different kinds of students and trying to come up with ways that we could make sure that these skills were being seen in all of our students, regardless, again, of socioeconomic status, students with disabilities. One of our targets for supporting students in the early goings of our first pathway was we had an engineering pathway that was very male heavy. And so we wanted to find ways that we could inspire more females to be involved. In the years since, we've added 3 other pathways, which has been also been driven really specifically by some of this skill work. By the end of that year, sorry, next slide, sorry. By the end of that year, we had decided to do a workshop on different kinds of personas, and you're going to see 3 different ones that we had the staff come up with. And these were intended to represent different kinds of students that we saw. So here's one. This was something that we had developed as part of a half-day professional day. And then we actually did some gallery walking and put together a protocol for our staff to pull out of this ways that we could get these students to work together, ways that we could embed the competencies that they needed. And if you look at, here's a lot, you'll see in the 3 of them, this was one student. Here's the second one. This was one of we all know this kid, the kid who's going to just do whatever it takes to be right in the middle, but wants to go to work, isn't going to do anything extra. And then the 3rd student that I'm just sharing, we've had about a dozen of these. This is, someone for whom trauma-informed instruction is needed. And we wanted to come up with a line of best fit for all of our classes. What that has done for us in looking at all of these different kinds of students, different disabilities, different needs, different backgrounds, and even different wants for the end and the different places where they come to us now. If you want to look at the next slide, is we morphed this into a book study. Last year, we had a number of our staff members were given a copy of the book Leaving to Learn. Highly recommend it. If you haven't read it, it is a pretty pretty good tome, I guess. Elliot Washor, who is from Big Picture Learning, is one of the co-authors. I've had a chance to present with him. It looks into some of the reasons why students drop out and some of the conditions for learning that our students would require. And it helped our department leaders really get into the shift of all learning happens within the school walls to looking outside in ways that, again, those workforce partners who are already shaping our thinking about skill would be able to help shift more directly our thinking about curriculum. This coincided with some departments already having a conversation around standards-based grading. We visited some other sites. We used some of our resources. We visited our CAPS network, part of the CAPS network. We visited a couple of our colleagues out in the Midwest, and wanted to make the activity that we provided aspirational. There's a link in here that I can plug into the chat that gave us a curve in terms of where we were and where we wanted to be in terms of technical competencies, academic competence, soft skills, school culture, ways that our staff collaborates. And we put ourselves in some different places, and that self-assessment helped us be more aspirational and also to look at it and say, you know what, maybe there is a different way for us to look at things. For example, one of the messages that kept coming up from our workforce partners involved effective collaboration. And when we looked at effective collaboration, I mean, how do you give somebody an A in collaboration? I mean, we really wanted to come up with some holistic and specific criteria by which we could give students feedback, and not only give them feedback, but give them opportunities to reflect on ways they could improve. And this, again, meant all students. When we look at the equity framework in our technical courses, our pathway-related classes, they're all heterogeneously grouped. So we wanted students to get a sense of working together with students that they may not have necessarily seen in an honors math class the year before. And also with the understanding that there's students who have English language learning needs, and there are students who have disabilities, and students who are maybe socioeconomically disadvantaged. And we wanted to look at that, kind of across the board. Where Leaving to Learn came into place was it got people out of the mindset really of all learning happens within the walls. And for some of our students, getting them out of the building or bringing the structures of outside the building to the building would manifest themselves in better learning opportunities. I don't think I have another slide. I might. No, I don't. So that's sort of a little bit about our story, and I hope that was helpful.
Extremely helpful, Mike, and thank you for sharing how it's really capitalizing on this moment of innovation pathways to drive whole school change conversation. Really powerful, and sort of sharing some of those specific resources helpful. I know that while both of you were presenting, Kristen and Mike, people were asking for the recording and if the slides will be available, and the answer is yes, absolutely. After all of our sessions, the benefit of being virtual is that we can record everything and share everything afterwards. And so our technical assistance website, which Jennifer put the link in the chat, we'll also share that again later in the workshop. We'll have all of the materials from today, including the Padlets, the presentation recordings, the slide deck. All of that information will be available to you. Kristen and Mike, thank you so very much for presenting and sharing. I know it's a tough task to share in just a few minutes all of the work that you have done, but I think both did a beautiful job in sort of sharing a synopsis and really what drove each of those approaches within your schools. So thank you so much. And if you would be willing to share your email addresses within the chat, so if folks have follow-up questions, though we don't have time for sort of whole group Q&A here, they can reach out to you to ask those questions. I'll also put a plug that both Kristen and Mike are part of our peer and Innovation Pathways peer ambassadors this year. And so we are so very fortunate to have a group of 6 peers from across the Innovation Pathways Network who are peer ambassadors. And so both Kristen and Mike are part of that. And you can read more about our peer ambassadors on the Technical Assistance website. We've got a whole page dedicated to those folks. We want to give you a bit of time as we're sort of heading towards the latter half of our workshop to process and ideate with colleagues. So our last activity is really a time for you to process, ask hard questions of yourselves and of others, make connections, both to different sort of initiatives and things and priorities that are happening within your school, but also make connections across the network and start to think about what a right next step might be for you, for your students, for your school, for your district. And so we're hopeful that in these conversations, your next step involve being disruptors and that you feel empowered and have the resources and the backing of the network to make some of those changes, ask some of those hard questions. And so we're going to move into breakout rooms. Again, just an opportunity for you to do some processing, ask questions, and ideate with colleagues around sort of all of your reflection. We shared a lot of information, sort of very quickly ran through a lot of things today. And so it's an opportunity to just sort of sit and process that before your day gets busy again. And so we really want you to consider sort of these two questions sort of distilled down to what resonated and what questions are being generated from you after today, and what can your next steps be and who can help. And so really encourage you to think together around of everything that you've heard today. What are the ideas that you've heard that are resonating with you, and what questions are sort of those sort of the learnings or the things that have been shared today bringing up for you, and what essential questions might you or could you sort of use within your context. And then to be thinking about who can help you, who might you enlist within your school setting, within your community, within your district to help you, no matter the size of the step, right? So as Mike sort of shared this whole school change, Kristen shared sort of one aspect within a pathway, or it could be, a conversation with a colleague and what might that look like. So really sort of encouraging you, depending on your role, to think about what the appropriate next steps could be. So we'll have you in breakout rooms with 4 or 5 other people. We're going to give you about 15 minutes in those breakout rooms. We'll send you a 5-minute warning and then a 2-minute warning before we kick you back to the main room. But really an opportunity to sort of just reflect and share and have discussion with colleagues about what's come up for you today. So we'll give about 15 minutes in breakout rooms, and we've got about 10 minutes of final content and sharing before we wrap up for the day. Well, welcome back, everyone. We hope you had some good discussion, that you had a few moments to reflect and debrief and share ideas with one another. And as we close out these breakout room discussions, we want to ask you one last thing today to capture your collective thinking about next steps. And so Allison is going to share a link to a Google Doc in the chat. And once you have that open, we're asking you to take a quick 1 to 2 minutes to write down one commitment or next step that you have after your learning and reflecting today during the workshop. And so when you get that link open, you can pick any line. There's a whole lot of them there, more than there are folks at the workshop. So pick any line, jot down your initials, and then a quick sentence. What is your commitment? What is your next step after today? Of course, it can change. We're not holding your feet to the fire on this, but really an opportunity to see where folks are thinking, what's coming up for you, what are your commitments at the end of the workshop today. Give you a moment to get that open and share that. If anyone has any trouble with the permissions, let us know. Make sure to adjust those. While you have that open, I'm going to, in the interest of time, run through a couple of sort of upcoming reminders and closing information, but feel free to keep typing in there as you're listening in. As always, a reminder that the Innovation Pathways Toolkit is available to you. So we have a virtual toolkit that has lots of different resources on design, development, structures, self-assessments, a whole lot of tools to support your design, implementation, and continuous improvement of your Innovation Pathways programs, and continuing to add to it all the time. And a section of that is categorized by different topics. So things around student supports, work-based learning, advising for students. And so there are examples of resources that both CCE and DESE has shared, as well as some examples from other colleagues across the network. So please always do take advantage of the toolkit and the integrated FAQ guide that's part of that toolkit. A couple of upcoming event reminders. Our next event is on February 2nd, which is a Wednesday. And sort of hot off the presses, the registration link is available just this morning. And so we'll be sure to share this out with you via email, but you can also access it from our technical assistance website, which is linked at the bottom of the page here. And that's going to be titled Work Smarter, Not Harder. And so really thinking about using Google Sheets and other tools to support your Innovation Pathways programs. I apologize for smiling here. My dog is snoring very heavily underneath my feet here. I apologize if you can hear that in the background. So that's on February 2nd, which is only a few weeks away. Apologies here. March 8th, we have our next program spotlight. So we'll be folks from West Springfield will be highlighting some features around their engineering and advanced manufacturing program. That registration link will be available shortly as well. We have our final workshop of the year on March 30th. So topics still in the works. We're trying to be as responsive as possible to the topics that are coming up from all of you. I have a whole list of things that have come up here today that we might think about as part of that workshop. But so that will be our final sort of lengthier, sort of 2-hour-long workshop of the year. On April 12th, we have Innovation Pathways in Early College Programming. And so thinking about how do these two programs, if your school is thinking about or already both Early College Designee and Innovation Pathways Designee, what does that look like for those two programs to sort of live in tandem with one another and complement one another in a school system? And we'll have both folks from DESE sort of sharing their perspective, as well as some colleagues who are in the middle of this work, sharing what their experience has been, some tips and tricks there. And then finally, on May 11th, we have a program spotlight, which we're titling You're a Designee, Now What? And so this is specifically for our new designees who have just been, awarded their designation, sort of helping them think about what are some of those most salient leverage points that you can think about as we end this school year and get ready for next and starting opening your program. So that's our slate of activities for this year. Of course, if you're part of our PLCs, those will continue monthly through the rest of the year. Our next meeting is next week if you are signed up for those. And as always, all of this information, registration, resources from past events, resources from this event will all be on the technical assistance website. And then finally, we'll share one more link in the chat, and that's a link to our survey. So all of our events, we ask for sort of an exit survey. It takes literally less than 2 minutes to complete, but we do take the opportunity to look through each and every response and use that information to make decisions about future offerings. So please share how today went for you, what worked, what didn't work, and what you'd like to see in the future. We'll make sure to send this link out as well. I know a number of people had to sort of drop off for meetings at the half hour or sort of just before the hour. So we'll make sure to send this out in an email as well after today's workshop. And with that, we want to thank you. We know that this is an extraordinarily difficult time to be working for and with and in schools. And so thank you all for taking the 2 hours of your time this morning to be with us. We hope that today was helpful and beneficial and sparked your thinking and really gave you some new ideas to work with or helped you refine some things you were already thinking about. A special thanks to Mike Rubin and Kristen Almquist for presenting today. We greatly appreciate it. To my colleagues, Don and Jennifer and Allison, thank you. We're here for a few minutes. If you want to hang on for any questions, we can be here. But other than that, thank you so much. We really appreciate you, appreciate all that you do, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks so much, everyone.